Hello and welcome, dear students. Our topic for deliberation is social stratification, class, varna, jati and untouchability. The main objectives of this lecture are: number 1, to know about the social stratification; number 2, to know about the functioning of varna and jati; and finally, to know about the status of untouchability. Pastoralism gradually gave place to agricultural communities, provided the background for the earliest Vedic literature. The social philosophy recorded in the Rig Veda was an outcome of persistent philosophical discourse accumulated with historical experiences of then society. It was founded that the accumulation of social evolution was a decline in rituals that was promoted the superiority of twice born and safeguarded the hierarchical social structure. This caused considerable discontent at the bottom of the social order. In the meantime, Buddhism and Jainism emerged as alternative to the hierarchical and non-egalitarian philosophy and practices of Brahmanism. In Buddhist and the Jain writings, questions pertaining to caste and the Brahman superiority emerged frequently. This shows that this was a significant social and philosophical concern at the time. The earliest Buddhist writings reflected a more established agrarian economy and the developing urban commercial sector. The Mauryan period, which is about 4th century to 3rd century BCE, witnessed the establishment of an agrarian-based imperial administration. The foundations laid by the imperial Mauryans were further carried forward in the following periods. There was a phenomenal increase in the internal and the external trade during the period under discussion. These formations resulted in several changes to the social and cultural spheres. This section will examine some of the most significant changes in the social environment, including class, varna, jatis, and gender relations. Now, dear students, let's focus on the varna hierarchy. Despite the significance of kinship ties, later Vedic texts reveal the emergence of a class structure in which social groups had different degrees of access to productive resources. The emergence of varna represents the increasing socio-economic differentiation of the historical period. From the perspective of elite groups, this differentiation was even more justified by ideology. This ideology established social borders, roles, status, and the ritual purity by dividing society into 4 hereditary classes. Members of the 4 varnas were believed to possess distinct innate qualities that made them naturally suited to particular jobs and social status. The duties and the roles of the 4 varnas are developed in subsequent Dharmashastra literature. The varna hierarchy was to remain an important aspect of the Brahmanical tradition's social discourse for many centuries. The Purusha Sukta hymn in Book 10th of the Rigveda Samhita mentions 4 social groups. These are Brahmana, Rajana instead of the Kshatriya, Vaishyas and Shudras. However, the term varna is not mentioned in. It discusses the 4 groups as well as the great deals of other things as deriving from various sections of the body of a primordial giant named Purusha. During an old sacrifice in which Purusha served as a sacrifice. The symbolism of the body in the Purusha hymn suggests that the 4 varnas were viewed as interconnected portions of a singular entity. Simultaneously, it depicts a definite hierarchy of ranks with Brahmanas at the top and the Shudras at the bottom. The fact that the varnas are portrayed as having been created at the same time as the earth, sun, sky, moon suggests that they were intended to be seen as a part of natural entity and unchanging order of the world. In fact, as noted by B.K. Simth, the varna model was applied to the other areas of the world, the gods and the nature in addition to society. Initially, it appears that the relative position of the higher varnas were ambiguous. When Indra is credited with the creation of the varna in the Panchavamsa Brahmana, the Rajana are listed first, followed by the Brahmanas and Vaishyas. The Shatapatha Brahmana likewise positions Kshatriya at the top of the hierarchy. In other portion of the same literature, that is Shatapatha Brahmana, the order is Brahmana, Vaishya, Rajana and Shudra. However, beginning with the Dharma Sutras, the order of the four Varnas in the Brahmanical tradition being fixed. There was a close but complicated relationships between the Brahmana and the Kshatriya Varna. Later Vedic texts highlight the king's dependence on the Purohita and the close ties between the Rajana and at least a section of the Brahman class. On the other side, the conflict between the Mitra and the Varna has been interpreted as the representation of the conflict between the two Varnas. Mitra represented the Brahma, which means the holy power, while Varna represented the principle of Kshatriya, means secular power. There are several descriptions of the relationship between the Brahma and the Kshatriya, ranging from antagonistic to complementary to interdependent. Upanishadic philosophy has also been interpreted, at least in parts, as a manifestation of the Kshatriya challenge to the Brahmanical hegemony in sphere of ultimate knowledge. The first three Varnas were referred to as Divijya, which means twice born, and refers to those who were entitled to perform the Upayana ceremony, which was seen as a second birth. They were entitled to perform the Agni Yudha, or the initial lighting of the holy sacred fire, which signaled the start of householders' ritual duties. However, the writings also highlighted the distinction among the three Varnas. According to the Atarya Brahmana, the Rajasuya sacrifice bestowed certain qualities on each of the four Varnas. Like the Brahman received Tejas, which means luster. The Kshatriya received Virya, which means courage. The Vaishya received Prajati, which means procreative abilities. And the Shudra received Pratishtha, which means the stability. Depending on the Varna of the sacrifice, later scriptures such as the Sruta Sutra laid out the various details of how sacrifices like the Soma sacrifice and the Agni Yudha should be performed. The Brahmins held a privileged position in the Varna hierarchy, being connected with the sacrifice and knowledge, particularly the study and the teaching of the Vedas. Varna states in the Atarya Brahmana that a Brahman boy is preferable than a Kshatriya when he learns that a Brahman boy will be sacrificed to him instead the son of King Harshchandra. The Shatapatha Brahmana attributes the Brahmana with four particular characteristics, that is, parental purity, good conduct, glory, and educating or safeguarding people. Moreover, he is connected with getting four privileged from the people: honor, gifts, freedom from harassment, and freedom from beatings. The Kshatriyas or the Rajanyas were associated with power, fame, rule, and warfare. The Vaishyas were linked with material wealth, animals, food, and production-related tasks such as agriculture and cattle rearing. During the Soma sacrifice, prayers for the protection of the Brahma, Kshatriya, and Vaishya were offered. Depending on the Varna to which the Yajamana belonged, the goals differed. For the Brahmana, the goal was priestly luster, which means Brahma Virchas. For the Rajanas, the Pavas, which means Indriya. And for the Vaishyas, animals and food, which means Pushu and Ana. The Shudras placed at the base of the Varna ladder was predetermined from the beginning. He was known for doing menial works and serving the higher Varnas. He was unable to perform Vedic sacrifices. It was forbidden for a Dikshita, someone who had undergone initiation for Vedic sacrifices, to talk with the Shudra. Atarya Brahmana states that the Shudra is subject to the wishes of others. He can be forced to stand up and can be beaten at the pleasure. There were social classes, even lower than the Shudras. The Dana Satuti listed slaves, referred as Dasas and the Dasis among the gifts. However, occasionally, descendants of slave mothers could rise to the position of power. For instance, a woman slave of the queen of Anga makes mention to Kakshivan, son of the sage Dirghamatas, in the book first of the Rig Veda. The author of the Rigvedic hymn in Book 10, Kakshva Alhusha, is also referred to as the son of a female slave. These probably were exceptional cases. Even though there are no strong traces of untouchability in later Vedic literature, groupings such as Chandals were certainly treated with contempt by the elites. The Chandogya Upanishad, the Taittiriya Upanishad and the Shatapatha Brahmana includes Chandal in the list of victims to be offered in presumably symbolic Purushamedha sacrifice, which means human sacrifice, and depicted him as being dedicated to the deity Vayu, which means a wind god. The dedication to Vayu has been interpreted as implying that the Chandal resided in open air or next to cemetery. But this interpretation is highly speculative. According to Chandogya Upanishad, people who conducted meritorious deeds in this world quickly get rebirth in favorable condition as a Brahman, Kshatriya or Vaishya, whereas those who performed bad actions acquire birth a comparably low condition as a dog, a boar or a Chandal. The Shatapatha Brahmana narrates the tale of a king named Vidgamathavan, who initially resided on the banks of the Saraswati and crossed Sandhaniru, which is also known as Gandhak river, with his priest Gautamha Raghuvana and Agni Vishwanara in front of them. This tale has frequently been interpreted by historians as reflecting the eastward migration of Indo-Aryans and the first agricultural colonization of the eastern territories through the destruction of the forests. On the other hand, giving an early Vidhana ruler a respectable northwestern origin may have been a strategy to legitimize his reign, and the reference to Agni may be a reference to the expansion of Brahmanical sacrifice rituals to these regions. The later Vedic texts depict social interaction, conflict and assimilation processes. According to the Atarya Brahmana, Vishwamitra cursed his 50 sons to become the Andhras, Pundras, Shabras, Pulindas and Mutibas when they refused to recognize Shu Nahashapa or Devaratha as his son. This narrative illustrates the Brahmanical tradition's attempt to provide some acknowledgement to outsiders. Some non-Indo-Aryan communities were typically incorporated into the lower rung of Varna system. In actuality, the Shudras may have been a northwest dwelling non-Indo-Aryan tribe that eventually gave their name to the fourth Varna. However, not every tribe was assimilated. Some were merely recognized. In later Vedic literature, forest dwellers such as Kirtas and Nishadas are mentioned. They also reveal the creation of the idea of Malicha, a Brahmanical category that includes diverse tribal groups and foreigners regarded as outsiders. While later Vedic literature indicates that the society in Upper Ganga Valley was becoming increasingly stratified, occupations were still quite fluid. This is indicated at the Rig Veda, where the poet states, "I am a reciter of hymn, my father is a physician, and my mother grinds corn with stones. We deserve to obtain wealth in various actions." Now, dear students, let's throw some light upon the creation of castes. The four classes of the societies related to a process of social organization are essential to the understanding Indian society. This was and remains the prevalent nature of group identities known as caste. The word as it is used in modern European language derives from a root that means pure and reflects the application of what is known as Varna, a concept that is now frequently translated as ritual status. In a status ladder, the Brahmins held the highest and the most pure position. Interestingly, a 4th century BC account of Indus civilization recorded by the Greek Megasthenes basically mentions 7 broad categories without any link to purity levels. He asserts that the philosophers are the most esteemed, but he includes in this group the Brahmanas and the Shramanas, which were the members of heterodox sect, who did not hold the Brahmins in the highest regard. Elements of the caste have been observed in different societies, but their manifestation in Indian society is unique. As a construction based on the ritual status, the Brahman's position had to be highest, as the Brahman ritually represented the purest category. This concept can be traced back to the Vedic corpus, which, being the earliest literary source, came to be regarded as the base of caste system. This corpus of books represented the Brahmanical perspective on caste and asserts that the Varnas were created on certain occasions and have remained essentially unchanged. Not only did the Brahman Varna commands of ritual offering authority, but its claims of purity also set it apart. In the Varna ordering of society, concepts of purity and pollution were important, and activities were developed within this framework. Varna is formless and orderly, dividing society into 4 groups ordered hierarchically. The Brahman, who was a priest, the Kshatriya, warrior aristocrat, the Vaishya, cultivator and trader, and the Shudra, who labors for others, with the 5th being the untouchables, and so beyond the pale. However, there have been alternative perspectives on the origins and the operations of the caste society. Jati is a notion used as frequently as caste. It is derived from a root that means birth, and the number of jatis are listed individually and are too numerous to count. The jati hierarchy is neither coherent nor uniform, while its existence can't be denied. The notions of jati and the varna have some overlaps but are also distinct. Therefore, the question is how caste society evolved and which of the two occurred first. According to some scholars, the earliest and the most fundamental division was varna, and jatis were subdivision of varna, because the Vedic corpus mentioned varnas. However, it can also be claimed that their origins and the roles were distinct, and that the absorption of jati by varna, like in case of Hindu castes, which was a historical process. In the Vedic corpus, the origin of varna is fairly transparent. The story of creation narrates the primordial sacrifice and the formation of 4 groups, afterwards known as 4 varnas, which are Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya and Shudra. Jatis are not mentioned until later sections of the corpus, and then only briefly, which is not surprising given that the corpus consists primarily of ritual texts. However, it is possible that the development of jatis was only the beginning phase. The clan may have been the origins of the jati before it becomes a caste. There are 3 prerequisites for a society to become a caste-based society. These are social disparities, unequal access to economic resources by different groups within the society, inequalities legitimized through a theoretically irreversible hierarchy, and the imposition of hierarchy claiming to be based on a supernatural authority. The latter takes the shape of a ritualistic boundary based on the presumptive levels of purity or pollution as defined by those in charge of the religious ideology. In many societies, the first 2 characteristics would be present to a minimal degree. These would be key traits of a jati, and certain clan groups may display them to a lesser extent. The ideological characteristic of Hindu society is derived from varna. Insistence on the ultimate purity of one group requires the total impureness of another. In this case, the untouchables as a counterbalance. There are many similarities between the clan and the jati in terms of social organization. Jati takes its meaning from birth, which determines membership in a group and position within it, as well as regulations governing the circles within which marriage could or could not occur, and rules governing the inheritance of a property. Difference in ritual and worship, as well as the adoption of a hierarchical structure among jatis, would further contribute to the consolidation of a jati identities. Consequently, these are entities that gradually evolve their own cultural identities with language, customs, and religious practice distinctions. An important distinction between clans and the jatis is that occupation became a status indication in jati-based culture, which includes a greater range of occupations than clan-based cultures. Contacts with other societies would influence the differentiation. Segmentation and hierarchy made it easier to maintain order in such a society, but their continued existence required an ideological justification. Occupations were also required to be incorporated into the hierarchy in order to maintain system. To assure the availability and continuity of labor, for example, it had to be positioned at the lowest level. The ideology of Varna was then imposed on communities familiar with jati concepts. Derived from religious sanction and woven into the jati framework, the concept of purity and pollution made it difficult to alter the system. The transition from tribe or clan to caste or from jan to jati, as it is frequently referred to, was one of the fundamental alterations in Indian social history, and whether it occurred as a result of persuasion or conflict would have depended on the specific circumstances. The change would have influenced every area of their life. Certain foods such as beef and alcohol would become taboo for those inducted in higher caste status, and eating together, which has been a form of bonding among clans, would be disapproved. The assertion of a woman as equal member of society would be curtailed, forcing them to accept the subordinate role. Religious rituals were new and strange, as were some of the deities to be worshipped, although there was substantial consensus. New activities prompted the dissolution of several old clans. The change of clan to jati was not the only means by which castes were formed. Since caste identities were also determined by occupations, various professional associations, particularly urban artisans, began to observe jati rules by accepting a social hierarchy that defined marriage circles and inheritance laws, by adhering to common customs, and by identifying with a location. Another type of jati arose from a religious sect that initially comprises members of multiple jatis, but began functioning so effectively as a unit that it too eventually became a caste. The history of Lingayat caste in the peninsula is a striking example of this. However, it was not the case that every existing varna was subdivided into jatis, but rather that jatis were frequently given varna statuses. This may also explain why jatis are universally acknowledged as functional social units in India, despite the fact that their names vary from area to area, whereas varna statuses are not universally observed with the exception of the Brahmanas and the untouchables. Intermediate castes have a variable social order. Consequently, the trading caste of Khatris in Punjab and the land-owning Villals in the Tamil Nadu were dominated at certain historical periods. Therefore, jati identities provides more penetrating insight into social reality than varna identities. But reference to varnas in the literature serves as indicator of socio-economic inequalities. Since the status of the superior varna was safeguarded, the majority of the new jatis would have been absorbed into the Shudra status. This would accommodate many occupations. Therefore, the new varna identity of Shudra would also accommodate some existing practices. The creation of jatis as the first phase in the formation of caste system implies that the jatis may convert to religion than Hinduism. A fascinating aspect of caste society in connection to religion is that, with the exception of hunter-gatherers, shifting cultivators, and forest dwellers who were considered to be outside the caste system, many religious communities besides Hindus have also obeyed caste-like regulations. Jati identities were regularly maintained after conversion to Islam or Christianity, which theoretically rejects caste. This was especially true when an entire jati or a significant portion of one in a town or a village was converted. Less ritual was consistent among these societies than restrictions of kinship and inheritance and the observance of marriage circles. This was largely because social customs remained consistent even after conversion. This brings up the issue of religious conversion as well. Individual conversion to Hinduism would appear to be difficult, whereas it would be simpler to convert the large group, that's the clan or the jati, and assign it a varna status. Other religions such as Buddhism, Jainism, Christianity and Islam encouraged individual conversion with greater flexibility. This is not to indicate that individual conversion was difficult, but that it was more challenging for Hinduism due to the intervening of caste and the religious groups. These classifications of societies do not exhaust the intrinsic permutation of social structures. These variations coexist in the same territory throughout the same historical time. The transformation of some of these groups into the caste adds a new dimension to the study of social history. The requirement to describe the structure of social ties sharpens the historical image of a place and period at particular moments and locations. Even if the historical reconstruction of an area or a time period concentrates on the dominant forms, the role of the minor ones must be incorporated. In India, societies evolved and changed. Understanding these processes requires comprehension of situations involving assimilation and conflict, tolerance and intolerance, and social inclusion and contestation, all of which are crucial to historical analysis. These requires not only knowledge with historical evidence, but also an explanation and comprehension of this evidence. Archaeological records provide easy access to data on the earliest type of human societies. So, dear students, it was all about today's lecture regarding social stratification of different classes of ancient India. Hope you have understood it well. See you next time with a new topic. Till then, take care. Goodbye.